so this idea of Indian and Indianness, and of course Kamala Harris, if she, most Indians that I know, especially those from India, the fact that she had a black father, they would have rejected her anyways. Because, many of them just have that racist gaze about black people. So it's rich. And I think what you point out is those contradictions quite brilliant. So even in this country, we rail against narrow forms of nationalism. Nationalism that is not like the Tories who rail against the tyranny of numbers, but a nationalism here that counts majoritarianism. But the same people here who rail against that majoritarianism, anywhere else, like in India, they love that majoritarianism. And they see no contradiction to that. So I think, thank you. Just like when we talk about, you said numbers, what do numbers mean? Because often when I'm thinking about patriarchy, which has been raised, if there were 100 men in a plantation and there were only 40 women, then 60 of those men didn't even have a chance to exercise patriarchy. They didn't even have, often they lived their lives without having any form of sexual desire that would be consummated. And in fact, if you read the records, some of those men were convicted of bestiality, of having sex with animals. But rather than it being a crime, it was a crime for a kind of physical contact they would never have. And where are those stories in the archives? But what I want to talk about today is, in this country, we've always had these fashions, which we borrowed from the North. So if you were a student in the 70s, you were brought up with this idea of neo-Marxism. Everything was class, every kind of social activity had to be fitted into class. And they never spoke about nationalism. Nationalism was a false consciousness or something that was written out of history. And so there's an article that everybody thought about. It was like, the Marxists wanted to say that the history of South Africa had to be understood by fractions of capital, contesting with each other, agricultural capital versus mining capital and industrial capital. Of course, by writing this, they wrote black people out of history, because there was no black people. Then the social historians came. And the social historian said, we've got to tell people stories. Where are the human element to these things? And a contest took place. Because Mike Morris, who was in the Marxist camp, said, if it was all about social history, then all you have to train students is how to use a tape recorder. Because there is some things as class, and caste, and race, and nationalism, and capital accumulation, and categories. And you've got to understand these things. And probably one of the greatest books that brought these things together was Charles von Robinson's Casteman, where he uses these categories, temporalities, changes in forms of social relations to understand one man's life as a sharecropper. But now what I want to talk about tonight, this evening, is a new spectre that is haunting history writing. A new fad that has come to be, and it's called Indian Ocean Studies. Now, initially this was designed to sensitize us to show our locality was dynamically interconnected with the globe. But as this work has unfolded, a new agenda seems to have entered the academy. Its height is a recent article by Nafisa Isuk. In talking about her work, forgive me for quoting her at length. I do this because only by quoting her can you understand my consternation that this kind of intervention passes muster in peer-reviewed journals. Her article is entitled Words on Black Water, Setting South African Plantation Literature Afloat on the Kala Pani, which is the topic today. What is she trying to do? She is challenging what she sees as plantation literature, best epitomized by the work of Tupelia Mystery and Via Desai, which has become, in Hofmeier's words, according to her, too land-based and too solid. From this vantage point, Shakes runs to a critique of existent work. Will Bill Freund's book, Insiders and Outsiders, emphasizing Indian resilience, followed shortly by the rather less critical work of Surendra and Joy Brain, which she says became the first scholarly work to use the description of settler as a normative category, encompassing Indians of both indentured and free backgrounds. According to her, this is written in the spirit of bootstrap-nationalism. Its linear progression towards Indian achievement failed to consider the vastly differing material or imaginative starting points for those who made it into the book as exemplary settlers. Uma Mysteries from Cane Fields to Freedom Coatinger, whose title hints at the trajectory of the narrator, further cemented the idea of an ethnic population rising against the considerable structural constraints of their time in South Africa. This, I'm afraid to say, is pure nonsense. Uma's use of the word freedom is meant to denote that one of the struggles of Indian South Africans was to be regarded as full citizens in the country of their birth. The collapse of apartheid and the right to vote in South Africa's first non-racial democratic elections is a vindication of that struggle. In fact, if you read Uma's commentary in the book, she pays attention to the concerns over the whole idea of the rainbow nation. And if Sheikh had bothered to read some of her work, especially on communities in Cape Town, she would soon come to realize that it is far from portraying, in her words, the idea of an ethnic population rising against the considerable structural constraints of their time. Sheikh hauntingly asked us, but where do we find the human stories of endangerment? And she responds, there is an argument to be made for situating the organic voyage of indenture in the material time of the journey each vessel took upon the Kalapani. The very human transformations reward within this material temporality, which we know include shipboard protocols of inspection, bureaucracy, medicine, maritime law, commerce, record keeping of births, and segregation of men and women, might be better understood free from the genre of labor imprisonment and viewed rather from the temporal perspective of each person, their circumstances and actions embedded in all the notions of time, of anticipation or waiting, uncertainty and expectancy, the possibilities of desire in shorter and longer, linear and cyclical time frames, or beginnings and continuations and transformations and perpetuations and ends. And so we wait in anticipation for this rereading of the archive of the ship, the distilling of the truly individual stories to give us a sneak preview into what Sheikh calls the effect of a magician's black box, a space for transfiguration, of aspiration and mobility outside the land strictures of caste ordained by birth and maintained by village communities. But there is nothing that follows, not even a woof that allows you to understand the social relations of the shipping movement. Sheikh lambasts the historiography of indenture in South Africa for its focus on land and schemas of belonging which do not attend sufficiently to the opacity and fluidity that crossing the Kalapani entailed. Crossing, according to her, of the opaque ocean invited a reinvention of lower and middle class identities, literally inserting themselves into different life worlds. And so we wait in anticipation for the lifting of the veil of the ocean crossing, of reading biographies whose lives were reinvented with a journey on water. Here too nothing is offered. The actual journey was of short duration. The ship was policed by British and the Lascars. Rain, rations and arbitrary punishment was handed out. In this context, what forms of reinvention was taking place? According to Sheikh, the way we need to understand all this is to draw from Hasim Hassan's work. According to Sheikh, it is clearly, and this is his work on the Revenge of Kali, a quote, drawn from the world of Indian cinema, which had by the 1950s cemented itself as predominantly shared cultural experience amongst Indian Durban. Hassan's use of both unexpected rainfall and almost theatrical staging to conclude the novel is his most powerful feature. A burst of lightning, followed by torrential downpour, opens the floodgates of history on a humble scale. Rain and dreaming give rise to a narrative that weaves through multiple ideas of self and consciousness, certainty, invasion, and truth. After making much of the ship as a magician's box, after castigating those who are land-based and do not understand multiple identities, Sheikh wants us to understand this through lightning and rain, which opens the floodgates of history on a humble scale. And where does this all come from? Here's Sheikh again. The exuberant dancing of Thiru and Mai in the downpour is reminiscent of the carefree Bollywood scenes of lovers drenched in unanticipated monsoon-like downpour in their everyday clothes. Oblivious to everything around them, and is captured by melody tunes reflected, this is Morpher, that falling water calls into question the expected transparency and fictional zoom of shifting scales. Theorizing scale through falling water, with all its disorientating estrangements, brings us to the ethics of crossing scales that fundamentally depends on humility. Now talk about magic and opacity. I challenge anyone to interpret what Sheikh is trying to say here. To see in Bollywood Technicolor the maddening paradox. After dismissing what she sees as land-based studies, Sheikh returns to the land, wanting to sensitize us to the agency of the indentured king that come after who are not wanting to pursue the links with India. We are now told the lives of these new subjectivities are captured by Thiru and Maili caught in a monsoon dancing their lives. Where is the temporality here? The idea that new subjectivities might be arising as material conditions change. And notice the hypocrisy as after castigating the dominance of what she defines as North Indian culture, she brings Bollywood center stage. But what Sheikh does not do, there is another way of writing and thinking about these things. One of my bag. See my bag. Magician's box. Oh, I left it there. So, for me, especially with the Bharatanatyam debate, and now Sheikh telling us we need to talk about Bollywood. The last time and the first time we witnessed what you can do with dance was with Surya Governor's ensemble at the inauguration of Mandela in 1994. And this is how some mad professor covered it in 1997. The first with Surya Governor's flaming saris, pulsating with the heel and hip of African dance, took to the stage. This was meant to be the opening cultural event on the scaffolding platform down low, meant to entertain the masses in the park as the affairs of state unfolded above. And entertain these dancers certainly did. In a number of crossover sequences, as traditional dance styles transformed into modern ones, their routine northly suggested the rescue of Indian maidens from stifling virtuousness. The crowd roared approval at the studied minutiae of veiled eyes and ringed figures gave way to expressive, almost provocative leaps and rolls. Traditional identities literally dissolved on stage as chastity transformed itself into sensual demand, as the petite banded together in a throng of sarongs. In some ways, this was the last act of protest theatre, for the identities being challenged in that dance were the ones laid down by the party state and its networks of mainly old patriarchs in the Indian community itself. By assimilating so stylishly the tone and treble of Indian cadences to deep African percussion and gyration, governors seem to encourage cultural intercourse between Indians and Africans to the point where those categories are no longer distinguishable. This blend was not awkward or exotic, but exciting and somehow natural. Governor was not denying difference, acknowledging that they were indeed one separate nations, that dance actually remanaged what it means to be Indian in Africa. Different, not separate. Black on brown, brown and black, Mississippi masala indeed. Sheikh writes for humility, but where is the humility here? The work of Joy Brain, for example, is dismissed as triumphalism. But it is her meticulous, painstaking work that brought the ship to this alive. Surendra Bana took up this baton and brought this kind of history from the margins to the center. Umar Dupere Musli has opened up a whole new world of research in the Western Cape, challenging those of us with a bias for KZN. mean that it is above reproach, but not to engage, but to label, not to draw on, but to condemn, is the degradation of the class of the intellectual. To simply write off the archives when the well of information has not even been tapped is a sacrilege for the historian. Sheikh once put plantation literature on water, but he drowns it in a dichotomy, water or land. It is a relationship that moves back and forth. Of course, there is deterritorialization. Caste gets loosened, class mobility happens, traditions get challenged. But it is deterritorialized. Things come back. India is building imagination. People are seeking their roots. There's at the same time an incredible deracination as children through social media become part of the whole world. Many things are happening to the mild accused of the revenge of the Kali. We must not allow the romance of fiction to trump the facts of history. In her work, she actually talks about, and that's what I want to orientate us. She actually says that the merchant trade supported the indenture system, with Indian entrepreneurs soon providing everything from ships leased by the national colonial government to transport indentured Indians from the subcontinent to Southeast Africa, to the foods needed for government rations, the numerous other goods from textiles to later cultural novelties like North Indian cinema in the form of Morocco.